started. So what have we got on the agenda tonight? First of all, pronouns, as I mentioned in the email earlier, and reading comprehension, the second half of that, the long passage. Emily's going to take both of these pieces. Then I'll do data sufficiency manipulations. And finally wrap up with the midterm survey. So we're going to do that at the end of class instead of in the middle. We will still take a break after the long passage, though. So with that, I'll kick it over to Emily.
Okay, thanks. And hi, guys. We're going to get into it with a question right off the bat. All right, last call for answers. And let me just ask all of you at once. I suspect you guys are in agreement about this. You see this split here between it and they. So my question to you, and just type it into the chat window, is what word is it or they taking the place of in this sentence? And just type that in. Yeah, you guys are giving me variations, but basically the term psychopath is one whole thing, and so you guys were all pegging that correctly. Okay, perfect. So that's basically what pronouns are all about. We have a few things we need to check once we make a connection between a pronoun and the word it's replacing in the sentence, but that's the fundamental thing. So the 5 that crop up the most on the GMAT are these, it, its, they, them, and their. We saw 2 of them in this particular one, and because you'll often see them split one against the other, we'll call those the deadly 5. They're small, sometimes hard to spot words, and it's easy to misuse them if you don't check everything you're supposed to check carefully. First thing to check, of course, is that antecedent. That's the official term for this, and you guys pegged this. So since the term is singular here, we want a singular pronoun, and you guys all avoided they. So my question to you is, and Andrew, I'm going to call on you for this one. How do you decide which of these options with it is the correct one? Andrew, go ahead.
You said with it?
Yeah, we need it because it's replacing the singular phrase or the singular word, the term. But how do you know, which of these options that has it is the right one? How did you determine your answer at this point?
Well, I kind of went back and forth between 2 choices, but I saw is popularly applied, so I thought it should be, at first I guess it should have been, is someone sort of continuing that on? Is someone who is, but then I went back and forth between B and D, so I wasn't sure.
Okay, so you're noting some possible parallelism. The term is applied, and maybe you're saying that the term is something later on in the sentence. And we have is in some of these choices. The only other option is this verb. It refers. Sounds like, Andrew, you're sort of agnostic on it, even though you did go with D ultimately. Anyone have a good reason to avoid is? Go ahead and raise your hand. Andrew's given us a good thing to look for, right? There is an is up there, so what of it? I see John typing, but looks like that's about some mic issues. Angela, what do you think? Why can't we go with B? This is the one that Andrew's sort of looking at. What do you not like about these options?
I chose D because I thought the verb refers was parallel with the verb applied, and if we go with it is, then it could refer to other nouns in the first phrase. It could refer to the term or the criminal. So I think that's why I chose D.
All right, so you're on to something here, saying basically that if you are looking for parallelism between the two verbs, well, it's really not a matter of matching is to is, but really this whole verb is applied. It's something that you do with a term, and refers is also something that you do with a term, or that the term does. Yeah, so in terms of meaning and also in tense, these are actually parallel with present tense, both things that the term would do. And there's another thing that you can do that we haven't named yet, and that is if you are using a pronoun correctly, you should be able to drop the antecedent back in its place and have it make sense. So what I mean by that is in choice A, it's saying the term is someone who is. And that's actually wrong. Can anybody tell why? Does this not make sense for a specific reason? The term is someone is. In B it would go like this. The term is a person. In D we have the term refers to someone. Well, Rafi, you're looking at the right types of things. Who is introducing a modifier. It is a relative pronoun, so there is another pronoun in this sentence. But actually that who is phrase is referring to the someone. So yeah, actually who would be appropriate to refer to someone? Yeah, and someone is for a person. Angela's seeing it now that we put the term back in there. A person is someone, right? But a term is not someone. And that's sort of ironic, right? If we want to use is, it works like an equal sign in a sentence. This is basically incorrectly equating a term to a human. And that's going on in both A and B, so we can get rid of both of those. Now you guys all went with D, which is the correct choice. Oh, I got you, Ravi. I see what you're saying. If it were, then it would be incorrect to say it who is. Yeah, definitely. Or the term who is. The reason E is incorrect, none of you guys picked it, is basically we don't have a good verb that parallels the is popularly applied. Not as well as D does with the word refers. E would actually parallel if it said is used in reference. That would probably be okay, but as is, there's no good verb here. All right, so D is correct. And that's our issue. So that's what we basically do every time you see a pronoun used, certainly in a choice. Go find the antecedent. You want to test whether it's sensible. The best test for that is read that antecedent back in place of the pronoun. Does it make sense to say the term is someone? It makes sense to say the term refers to someone, because the term is not a person. Okay, and so that's pretty straightforward once you spot that noun. Let's see another example here. Okay, Chris, would you grab the mic and talk about any splits you saw and choices that you eliminated for various reasons?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest thing was the them. So but also force them, and so at the end of each of the options, so the them seem to refer uh, to the other phone companies. So that didn't quite make much sense to me. So I thought C had correctly put the phrase "these companies" back in there, so that it made it very clear.
Yeah, and it's certainly a split at the end, as we often see. And part of what makes it clear who the them is supposed to be is frankly the other choices, right? Force 2 were offered these companies as an option in at least C and D. A split like this, where they give you a pronoun that's unclear and a sort of a synonymous phrase that is that clarifies things, you should definitely look into that quite carefully. So just the fact that there are two plural things in this sentence that the them could refer to is problematic, and you should lean towards C or D. Now, I want to show this to you in a slightly different way, just to kind of break this out a little bit. We kind of ignore this first part of the sentence before the comma. And this is what Chris is saying. It's unclear who it's supposed to be, the customers or the companies. Something else that you can look at when finding an antecedent is the structure of the sentence. That will sometimes help you out. And what I mean here is, notice the parallel marker words. Talked parallelism last week. Not only and but also. And check out what follows those. This should actually be parallel, right? Captured is a verb, and forced is a verb. So those are nice and parallel right after those parallel marker words. And what do we see after those verbs? We see customers, the plural noun, and we see them, the plural pronoun. So I would even make the case that not only them is them unclear in terms of antecedent, there's really good reason to believe that it's actually pointing a little bit more towards customers than it is towards companies, the intended plural noun. Let me know if that does not make sense. If it does, give me a smiley face. A frequent question that we see on our forum, in some cases the structure of the sentence will actually make the antecedent clear. You could get away with having multiple plural nouns and use them correctly as long as the structure points you to the right noun. It doesn't do that here. All right, good. So once we identify that, we basically can cross out any choice that has them. Chris, I'm going to go back to you. So what was the deal between C and D? Why one of these choices that has these companies over the other?
Yeah, that one was the. Sorry, that one was a little trickier. It just kind of didn't sound right, I suppose, on D. So it seemed like the verb "have been forced to offer" didn't make sense with what happened at the beginning of the sentence.
It didn't make sense with what from the beginning of the sentence?
I meant to say with the beginning of this phrase, with this "has not captured customers."
Excellent, excellent. So that parallelism thing, again, captured is active. We capture the customers, we force the companies to do something, or this event has, the company has. And D is a mismatch. It has the active voice captured, but passive have been forced. So something done to the companies instead of the other way around. So there you go. C is the correct answer, and most of you guys did pick that one. Any questions on this? It's probably worth noting there's another kind of parallelism thing going on here. There's poor parallelism in some of these choices because of a pronoun. So this is another way you'll see the deadly five rearing their ugly little heads. You have an unnecessary it here that breaks the parallelism by putting the subject where it doesn't need to be, in between the but and the also for this case. Good question, Rosie. As you're noting, obviously that's not our topic for this week, but it's showing up in a big way on this question. Parallelism is a big topic. I don't know, Chris, you can weigh in on this. It seems to me like parallel structures show up on, if I had to guess, about 70% of the GMAT sentences. That might be a little high, but Chris might know exactly. So we're still kind of on that same question. When you're finding the antecedent and making sure that it's sensible, it also has to be unambiguous. The fact that there is confusion indicates that you haven't used the pronoun correctly. So this is like the overlap of grammar and meaning on this test. Okay? And it's another thing that I should mention is that if we had used the same pronoun multiple times in the sentence, it's got to refer to the same antecedent every time. You can't use them to refer to customers once and then later use them to refer to phone companies. They didn't try to do that here to us, but it's something else to look out for if you see repeated use of the same pronoun. All right, take a look at this sentence. I'm going to have you guys type this just to the moderators. What is the antecedent of the pronoun in this sentence? And I'll direct your attention to it because there is the only one here. Who is they referring to? Hey Ganesh, would you grab the mic and talk about your thought that you just typed in there?
Yes, hello. I thought they referred to the allied, which is, I guess, a plural noun, but it's being used as an adjective to describe the attempt. So I was unsure of whether they refer to allied in this context.
Yeah, good. And most of your classmates picked up on this too. You sort of know what they mean by they. From the context of this sentence, it's got to be the Allies who concentrated troops in one place. And plus, they sort of prime you to know that it's the Allies by using Allied as a modifier here. This is one thing to really watch out for. Ganesh is right. It's attempt that is the noun here, and allied just is an adjective. And that's not good enough for GMAT reference purposes. You actually, if you're trying to refer back to the allies, they actually have to be there in the sentence as a noun, not as an adjective. So final check always is going to be, is it present? Is your antecedent present? Yeah, and this is, I think, probably the way we most often screw up pronoun usage in conversation, mainly because, when you're talking to your friends and you make an error like this, they still understand what you mean. There's a similar kind of trap. It's called possessive poison, or we call it that, in which you have to watch out for a possessive noun. And the things to look out for is, you can refer to Jose's room and then later talk about Jose's mother by using a possessive pronoun, and that's okay. But we can't talk about his mother praising him, because him is Jose, right? And he's not in the sentence as a noun. The noun is the room. Why don't you guys type in some suggestions to fix this sentence? Go ahead and just type that to everybody. And there's more than one way to fix this sentence, so if yours is already up there, think about another way to do it. I love these suggestions. So we can either have his mother praising his cleanliness, so we're actually inserting a noun, cleanliness, instead of him. The his, in that case, Andrew's suggestion would be clear because Jose's cleanliness is what we're talking about. So the possessive wouldn't be a problem with his. You could even refer to the room's cleanliness, as Ravi is suggesting. Its cleanliness, its would have an antecedent of room, so that would be clear as well. Chris is suggesting her son. His mother could possess him, right? And son is very clear. It's a proper noun instead of a pronoun. And Ryan, clearest way to fix it is just to put Jose in the sentence and not use a pronoun at all. Another option is this. You know, if you're free to fix the beginning of the sentence, you could change it so that Jose is the noun and no longer a possessive. With Jose as a noun, we can actually still use the possessive pronoun to refer to him, and we can also use the object pronoun. So that's a good way to go too. Okay, try this example. All right, missing a couple of answers. Go ahead and get those in. All right, fantastic. Here's where we are on this one. We are pretty well split on this. And what's notable is that there is a split at the beginning. I'm certain that you guys saw this. So let's talk about this first. We have sloths, plural, and we have the sloth, singular. Yeah, and note on our little chart here, this disagreement is definitely straddling this line between these two choices, sloth or the sloth. So let me hear first from the folks who went with C. Let me get a volunteer on this one. Why sloths? I'm going to volunteer you, Ryan. Ryan, why did you like plural?
I picked C first off because of parallelism. It says use, sleep, and move. The original didn't have them in parallel. And then, let's see, I didn't pick D or E because I wasn't quite sure what the antecedent for its was.
Okay, so it sounds like you actually weren't drawn to sloths plural in the first place. Let's deal with this since we're on pronouns. What does its refer to? Those of you who did go with D or E. I'll release the mic. Anyone can pick up. Who's its rubbery limbs? Okay, thanks Danielle and Razi. You guys are typing that in fast enough. There you go. Yeah, it actually is the sloth. It's noteworthy that these are the two choices that actually put the sloth in singular terms, so it is appropriate to use its. We didn't see its in the other choices, and that's a good thing because they couldn't have referred back to this plural sloth. Did anyone pick sloths for that word in particular? You guys all sort of defaulted there for other reasons. All right, looks like nobody is clamoring to justify this one. So how about the sloth? Can anybody give a reason why you picked the singular version of it? Ganesh, you want to grab that?
I picked the sloth because at the end of the sentence it says its coat and its toes, and its refers to a singular noun, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But you know, Chris has a really good point here. Isn't there more than one sloth? And yeah, John, you're sort of agreeing with that. Why couldn't they be talking about the species? And what about this? Found throughout Central and South America, right? How can one sloth be in many, many places? Yes. Well, species is plural. I noticed that that refers to the algae, and they actually said there are two species. Yeah. So it's really what Ganesh mentions, this it's at the end. And it's really tempting, I think, in a lot of cases to get to the end of the underlying portion and go dive right into the splits and the choices. But sometimes the language after that we're stuck with is what ends up being important. You know, we're stuck with its coat and its toes, and we cannot change that. So we have to think, well, whose would that be? It is the sloth that has toes that we're talking about and a coat. And so we need to make the sloth singular. And here that is. Has to refer back to sloth, but not sloth. That wouldn't work out correctly. So what's the split between D and E? Hey, Rossi, would you grab the mic and talk about that? Because that hangs and moving stuff sort of harkens back to what Chris was saying about, I think it was you, Chris, right, who were saying that use, sleep, and move is more parallel in C. We don't have anything that parallel, do we? So, Rossi, what do you think?
When I was looking at it, I looked at D&E. So sloth hangs from trees by its long rubbery limbs, sleeping 15 hours a day. I kind of just looked at from trees by its long rubbery limbs as like a little bit of a modifier to the sloth hangs. So then it leaves us with the sloth hangs and moving so infrequently versus the sloth hangs and it moves infrequently enough. So it comes down to parallelism with hangs and moves versus hangs and moving. That's why I went with E, because it's parallel to each other.
Okay, so the parallelism there, and I've sort of indicated that with the, you know, the same color coding. All of these are present tense. And Danielle, you're saying there's different kinds of parallelism. Danielle, which one did you think was right? You're actually going with D. So why do you think D is actually more parallel?
I think we got at this in one example, I don't know if it was last week or, like, it's not just about like a sort of mechanic parallelism in the sense that everywhere it has to be the same form. It's that, like, within that mini phrase of sleeping 15 hours a day and moving so infrequently, it has to be parallel. And more so, I think the expression, like, it moves infrequently enough that it's just not correct. So I don't know. That's what I've done.
Yeah, Robbie, you want to respond to that? Go ahead. I saw you get on the mic, but I didn't hear any sound. Why don't you try that again?
Now, can you hear me now? I was looking at so infrequently versus infrequently enough, because I felt like infrequently enough indicated or referred to some sort of a threshold in order for algae to grow. So that's why I felt that enough was important in the sentence, because it says that infrequently enough that two species of algae grow on its coat and between its toes, etc.
Yes, and it turns out on this one, Danielle is right. She's remembering that example that Chris showed you guys last week where you had a structure with a main sentence with a single verb, right? The sloth hangs in this case, and you had parallelism between kind of secondary activities. In this case, the sleeping and the moving are things that the sloth does while it hangs. They're actually not verbs here, they're modifiers. And between the two of them, you have to have parallelism, because notice this and in here. But they don't have to be parallel to hangs. And on that topic, let's say you did want to say, if you were aiming for extra parallelism, and you said, well, why not make them 3 separate activities that the sloth does? You could do that, and that would be legitimate, but there is something here ruining it. It's the deadly pronoun it. Notice this messes up the parallelism, because what we have is the sloth hangs, the subject and verb. The second item, though, is just sleeps, just verb by itself. And here we have the sloth in pronoun form in front of the third verb. So E is actually not as parallel as it might first appear. If you had put an it in front of sleeps, then it might be a different story. You could probably argue that that's just as parallel, but as is, D is more parallel. Now on the issue of this idiom at the end, both of them actually get at the idea of a threshold for when would algae grow. Okay, move so infrequently that it happens, or moving infrequently enough that it happens. Either way, this sloth is crossing that threshold and growing the algae. What really is the difference is the intent. If you move infrequently enough that something happens, it implies that you are trying to do it. Yeah, this enough changes the meaning, I think, as Danielle is saying. So infrequently that the algae grows is different. It sort of indicates that you're moving very slowly and the algae sort of grows as a side effect, an unintended consequence there. And that's a little bit more close to the point. So D in this case is the right choice. Any remaining questions on this one? Yeah, so to Danielle's point, yeah, E would be possibly correct if you inserted another it in front of sleeps to make the parallel of make it actually parallel, and if you change the ending to so infrequently. All right, tricky question, kind of a different way of seeing that pronoun issue. Notice that we were given the antecedent in the choices. So this is the other sort of trigger. When you see a singular versus plural noun split, sometimes that means go find the verb that goes with it. It might be a subject-verb agreement split. Here it means go find the pronoun, and that's going to account for about 10% of the noun splits that you see. Yeah, kind of an interesting one. And that's our second question. Once you've linked the antecedent and the pronoun, the natural thing to check next is whether they have the same number, singular with singular, plural with plural. I just want to show you a quick example here. This is a common error in everyday speech. A lot of people will say, everyone here will need their own pencil, or did everyone do their homework? I say stuff like this all the time. But the GMAT's take on it is that everyone is a singular indefinite pronoun. All indefinite pronouns are treated as singular. So it's inappropriate to use their, which is plural. Okay, it's gender neutral and it's nice and everything for that reason, but they don't agree with that. Either his or her would be the right way to go, because those are both singular. It is an old error, and if you don't want to annoy your friends, I recommend that you not correct them on that. A minor issue on the GMAT is the idea of pronoun cases. There are 3 cases, and basically case boils down to what role is the pronoun playing? If it's doing something in the sentence or standing in for something, doing the action, then you make it the subject pronoun. For example, I threw the ball. I'm doing something, so I use the subject pronoun I. I don't say me threw the ball. And if the pronoun is on the receiving end of the action, use an object pronoun. So Jane threw the ball to me, not to I. And we've seen possessive pronouns already. So a couple of quick examples. And let me hop back here because I see a question rolling in. Yeah, there is incorrect because it is plural. So let me strike through that. His or her would do it, and you could use either one. You know, it's probably more inclusive to say his or her, but the point is that either one would be singular and therefore be a good match to everyone. Okay. Here's a quick example. Which of these two is correct? Me or I? Go ahead and just type it in. Yeah, you guys are entirely right. Either you guys are picking up on this or you have cracked the code of our color coding. Red is wrong and blue is right. Here's what I do. If Janice is in this sentence and there are two subjects or a compound subject, it sort of muddies the water. So what you can do is take Janice out of this sentence and ask yourself, should it be me went on a picnic or should it be I went on a picnic? The one that sounds right to you is probably the right one. People's ears help them a lot on this type of question. In fact, I think to me it sounds like the Cookie Monster when you say me went on a picnic, and that's a surefire sign that it's wrong. And so if I's right when it's alone, it should still be the same choice when Janice is along for the ride. So another example of that real quick is just this sentence turned around. The picnic's now the subject, Janice and I are the objects. And actually, I just misspoke there. I wouldn't say the picnic was attended by I, and so I shouldn't say I even when Janice is there. The picnic was attended by me and Janice. That's the correct one there. And on this issue, who versus whom? This is a subject that a lot of people try to dodge entirely because this is a very confusing rule. But I want to give you a practical tool for choosing the right form of this. What you can do is restate the sentence, even changing the order if you need to make it make sense, and substitute in he or him. And whichever one sounds right to you will tell you which you should choose. Let me model that for you. So I am going to marry him, or I am going to marry he. Your ear probably picked right up on it. Should be I am going to marry him. And if him is correct, then you want to put in whom. Notice that those two words are on the same list, right? So this is basically your test. If the object pronoun him sounds right, then it's the object pronoun whom that belongs there. Quick way to remember that is that they both end in M. If he had sounded appropriate, you'd use who. Those are on the same list together too. Pause here if anybody has questions on that. Looks like a couple people are typing. So the more grammatical explanation of why who is incorrect in that sentence is think about whether it's the subject or not. Who is a subject pronoun? So you would only use that if who is actually doing something, if you can match it to a verb. But check it out. The verb that's actually doing something in this sentence is I. I am going to marry. That's your subject-verb pair. I'm going to marry someone, right? And so that someone is this whom that I'm referring to. This whom is on the receiving end of this verb. Let me know if that helps, if you were the person who asked that. Yeah, it's the subject of this second part of the sentence. All right, looks like Chris is handling those. So let me show you a quick summary here. The deadly five are the ones that crop up the most, to be on the lookout for these. And always make sure that the antecedent can be paired with the pronoun clearly, unambiguously, and that the antecedent is one that makes sense when you replace the pronoun with it. If you're going to do all of that, of course, it has to be in the sentence. And as you are checking to make the antecedent pronoun match, I think it's something you'll kind of simultaneously check that they agree in number. The time when number will be your primary issue is what we saw, where you had a noun split and the pronoun was what dictated that choice. Proper case shows up very rarely, so I wouldn't worry about this too much. There's only a couple of examples in the official guide where this even crops up. And with that, I think let's move on to reading comp. And get started on that. Okay, so last week we did short passages, and today we're going to do the long passages, which aren't all that much different. I mean, obviously the only big difference is the length. So we're going to kind of arbitrarily name the long passages as those that are 3 to 4 paragraphs. There are some in the official guide that are a little bit longer than this, but the trend has been towards somewhat shorter passages and more of them in recent years. So I think 3 to 4 paragraphs is likely to be the max you'll see. In the book, anything over 50 lines would be treated as a long passage. On the actual test, use a scrolling rule. So if you have to scroll to see most or all of the last paragraph, then treat it as a long passage. You could see 3 to 4 questions on these. And obviously that's relevant because the fewer questions, the less worth it every line of reading is to you. But even still, there's not a significant number of extra questions to be found on a long passage versus a short passage. So that's going to be the biggest difference tonight. Our reading is going to be a little bit more streamlined here because every line is worth less to us on these passages than it was on the short passages. Aim for about 7 to 8 minutes per passage. You can stretch it a little bit longer for the long ones just because. But as with last week, we're going to do some note-taking. We're going to take notes a little bit differently tonight, and I'll show you why, but all the reasons for doing so are basically the same as last time. By writing as you read, you change what you notice, and you're more likely to pick up on the stuff that's relevant, the stuff that questions might be asked about. Yes, the scrolling is definitely the thing to rely on test day. You won't see line numbers, and if you have to scroll to see a line or two, then I'd still say it's a short passage. But more than a paragraph or so of scrolling would indicate a long one. So here's what the skeletal sketch is, and this is our biggest difference from last week. On a long passage, they tend to be more organized. So you're likely to see kind of a hierarchical structure where the first paragraph is very weighty. It sets the tone for the rest of the passage, and it tells you what they're going to talk about later in the passage. And you'll find that second and third paragraphs are a little bit more subordinate to that. They basically just flesh out the idea that's already been presented. We're going to exploit that structure in the way that we take notes. So we will read very carefully that first paragraph and aim for a lot of comprehension there, 95% comprehension. And what do we mean by that? We basically mean that you should be able to paraphrase that paragraph and describe it to a reasonably bright but easily bored teenager and have them understand what the passage is about. If you can do that, then you've absorbed what you need to know. Take the detailed notes that you need to in order to achieve that, and then move on. For those later paragraphs, don't write as much and read in a sketchy way. You can read maybe just the first sentence or two, since you're likely to find your topic sentence there. Get the gist of the paragraph that way, jot it down, and some people will feel comfortable moving on from there and hopping down to the next paragraph. Some people won't. They'll want to skim this paragraph, and that's okay. But whatever you do, don't get lost in it. You're not going to absorb everything about this paragraph that you're going to need to know to answer questions, and that's not your goal on the first read anyway. For later paragraphs, do basically the same thing. So about 40% comprehension there means you know what the paragraph discusses, and you could go back and find it if you needed to. Okay. So we're going to practice this. And if you have your official guide handy, you might want to flip to page 386. If you don't, no big deal. We're going to put it on the screen. What I'd urge you to do is practice taking notes much like you will on test day. So I actually recommend that you do read the passage on the screen here and take your notes off to the side, so you have that looking up and down experience that we talked about last time. In order to see this one on your screen, though, we're going to have to reset our view, because there is going to be a scrolling here. And so here are the instructions. The second one is the most important. Making sure that we're not scaled to the window is important. And when you've got these set up, give us a green check to let us know you're ready. All right, let's get started. It looks like I got smiley faces or checks from all of you. Here is our passage. I'm going to put 3.5 minutes on the clock. I'll clear the polling as well. When you are done with your sketch, give us a green check. I have 2 green check marks, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of extra time, but try to wrap it up in about 30-40 seconds. All right, I'm going to stop us here because we're at about 4 minutes. Go ahead and give me a green check if you are at least in the last paragraph, even if you're not completely done. Okay. Looks like we're universal on that, at least. So if you are not quite finished, that's just, your first clue that maybe the first thing to work on is speeding up a little bit. So we'll talk about how we might actually get away with writing less. But let me first ask you guys this. And this might appear very large on your screen since we unclicked the scale to window, but you can scroll around to read it. There's very minimal text here. Since there's always a general question, or almost always, I would go so far as to say always, it pays to anticipate that, and we did this last week. Answer for us today, what is the purpose of this passage and what was the point? The distinction between those two things is that the purpose is what the author's intent was. So that's very often a verb. For example, to persuade would be a purpose of a passage, perhaps. The point is more likely to be a noun or something found in the actual text. What was the ultimate conclusion or big statement the author made? Think about those two things and type them in privately to us in the chat window. This is great. I'm going to start summarizing some of this up on the board. I'm getting lots of purposes suggested to us. So I'll put that up. I'm still missing some points. So what do you think was the point? Type that in if you haven't already. This is great. So by and large, you guys were saying the purpose is to talk about this theory, but in a certain way, to explain the theory, or to inform the reader about the theory, or to describe the theory, and all the stuff that would be relevant to thinking about the theory. So you guys varied in your wording on this, but excellent job. And what you'll note a lot of the time is that the purpose is rather neutral. It's highly uncommon to see a purpose that is to argue for a certain theory or to defend a certain point of view. There's a little bit more sort of neutral. He's just telling us about the theory and not really advocating one way or the other. And some of you actually put a finer point on that by saying, but there are other points of view that are valid as well. So all good stuff to note as you are anticipating general questions. On this next page, I'm going to show you a sample sketch. Go ahead and compare yours to it, and you can click the scale to window again if it bothers you to have to scroll around to see this whole thing. Compare yours to it and type into us if there were any significant differences between your sketch and this one. All right, this is great. Chris is commenting that, Chris Lake that is, saying mine was longer. Maybe that's why I went over. Yeah, and if you wrote significantly more than this, that could be something to dial back. You'll find that this much writing ends up being just as useful to you as significantly more writing. And I'd argue even the less writing that you do, the better. In fact, I want to type up on the screen something close to what Ganesh typed in when I asked you guys for the purpose and the point. He actually typed in what I think would be a reasonably complete sketch on its own. And it's even shorter than this. Here's what he had. He said, okay, one thing was they postulate a cause of ice age. You might even be more general and say they present a theory. And it's general because I don't necessarily need to specify what that theory is. I'm going to keep track for the next 5 minutes that this has something to do with ice ages, and that's good enough. The next thing he said was discussed was how to test it. Paragraph 2, or a new way to test it. Then he said, why other causes? Why there may be other causes. And I'm going to insert one more in here because there is a third paragraph that follows the second one, but they're very closely related in meaning. How to test the theory, but also advantages of new testing method. So smile for Ganesh if you actually like his sketch a little bit better. Certainly shorter, and that is an advantage in and of itself. Some of you are going to be a little bit more comfortable with more written down on your page. You're going to have to decide that for yourself. Let's move on to some questions, because this is where we see the benefit of this sketch. As before, by creating your sketch, you're anticipating general questions and their answers. So you should probably not really need to refer back to that sketch or even the passage for those. On specific questions, you basically want to use your sketch as a search tool, kind of like an index in a book. But, you know, like looking up an answer in a book, you need to actually go back to the source. Find your proof in the passage. We saw how important that was last week when we were misled by a quick read of the passage or possibly by our notes. We had to really read deeply back in the original passage to find the answer sometimes. So let's do some questions. I'm going to change that polling back to A through E. And looking for a minute or less on these. Okay, so we are unanimous on this one. You guys went with D, which is the correct answer. So, Roshan, would you quickly just grab the mic and tell us why D is the right answer? How do you know it's right, and maybe more importantly, how do you know the others are wrong?
Well, I didn't really see if there was, I guess we'll go one by one. If you look at A, suggesting an alternative to an outdated research method, if I look at my skeleton method, I didn't really see an alternative to a method, so A was kind of phased out at that point. B was introducing a new research method that called an accepted theory into question. It didn't. I guess the new research method didn't really call out an accepted theory into question in this case because it just kind of supported it. So that didn't really count me in this case. C, emphasizing the instability of data gathered from application of new scientific method. Yeah, that just didn't sound right to start with. So I kind of just cut that out right from the start. And E, I guess, initiating a debate. And I don't really think that we're not really starting a debate over here. It's more like we're just supporting a debate, supporting a theory that this guy had before. So that's how I came up with with D.
Good, good. Yeah, and I don't know that I would necessarily verbalize to myself during the test why all of those other 4 are wrong, but a quick glance at them should reveal a word or two that's wrong. If you've got the time, it's certainly a good way to go. I think it's good for us in class to do this. So Ganesh and Jean-Laurent, yeah, you could start top or bottom. It doesn't really matter. Some people are going to be drawn right to D because it says what our sketch said, right? There's this theory presented, and a new method to test it is described. And in fact, let me hop back here because I want to highlight what Ganesh wrote down. See how he wrote down almost this exact answer. Present a theory in paragraph 1 and a new method to test it in paragraph 2. That's the purpose of the passage because it's the big deal in those 2 paragraphs. So that's a good way to go. And there's sort of misquotes in all of the other choices. Outdated research method is the opposite of the new method they talked about. They talk about an accepted theory in the choices, but in the passage it was an untestable theory or previously untestable. So those are quick eliminations. Good. Great work on that one. Let's move on to this one. Just waiting on a couple of answers. So go ahead and put those in. All right, Razi, I'm calling on you because you just changed your answer and you changed it to the right one. So tell us your thinking.
Cannot be tested in my original answer was C, and I got hung up on the volcanic activity part. That triggered off a line that came in the last paragraph which said, it is important to note that other factors such as volcanic activity, etc., etc. But then the last minute I saw that the answer says it cannot be tested, but in actual fact it can be tested even without further research is done on volcanic activity. So that's why I changed it to D.
Great. And D is the right answer, absolutely. It's really great that you pointed out what they're doing to try to trick us here. That volcanic activity is mentioned because the GMAT writers know us better than I sometimes wish they did. They know that we remember the last things we read. And so, you know, volcanic particulates show up in that last paragraph, and they may stick in your brain there. And it's an appealing distractor in choice C. False relevance, though. And great identifying why that's wrong. It cannot be tested. That actually was not stated. In fact, paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 talked about a new way to test this method. So that's a little bit too extreme. Anybody approach this from a different point of view? Is there something about D that stood out to you in contrast to the other choices? I'll just release the mic. Anyone can pick it up.
I thought that some of the other choices, some of their words like "it is the only" or plausible explanation or "it is not plausible," sort of, I guess, those adjectives that they use to describe it seems a little too far-fetched, I guess.
I like the way you put that, Andrew. Too far-fetched, too extreme. And since there are 4 choices here that are very extreme and one that is much more forgiving, it stands to reason that the more forgiving one is going to be the easier one to prove. Yeah, so you want to steer clear of extreme language on reading comp questions and on some critical reasoning questions too. We'll see that crop up occasionally. Yeah, one plausible explanation. That sounds reasonable. It was presented as a plausible explanation, but others were mentioned in the last paragraph. So D is actually supported by the passage as well. Great job, guys. We're going to do 2 more. All right, take about 20 more seconds to get your answer in. All right. Last call for those answers if you haven't given it to me yet. Most of you are in agreement, those of you who answered earlier, and that tells me that you're probably looking at the same proof sentence or sentences. So I want you guys to point those out for us. Where do you find the answer to this question in the passage? If you would pick up the pointer tool on the screen and just point on the actual part of the passage that you thought was your proof. All right, this is great. Yeah, and John Laurent's like, well, it's right next to C. Yeah, it happens to be in this case, which is kind of convenient. The more land ice there was when the sediment was laid down, you guys are pointing here, but you guys also were pointing up above here, and I'm going to highlight in purple earlier in that paragraph, can be deduced from the ratio of 2 oxygen isotopes, 16 and 18. Yeah, this is kind of a 2-part proof sentence. And you guys are absolutely right. It leads you to pick C. Now, here's what I want to share with you guys. Whenever you see a question that begins with these words, according to the passage, you should basically expect to find an answer choice that is verbatim quote from the passage. So what's the most efficient way to look for the answer? There must be proof, and it's actually going to be word for word here. I'm going to give you guys 2 options, and I want you guys to tell me which you think is more efficient in terms of what you read first. Read the question first. Here's option A, and I'm writing this above. Option A is that you read the question, then you read the choices, and then you look for support in the passage. And option B is that you read the question, then you go to the passage, and then you look at the choices. Type in for us which way is most efficient, A or B. This is so interesting to me because you guys are pretty much evenly split between these 2 approaches. And I think the reason that we saw the choices straggle in from you guys and a bit of a struggle with time is that what seems to be most natural for people is this option A. Read the question and the choices and then sort of seize upon one choice maybe to try to find proof for that one. I will submit to you that I think you waste time as you do that. You waste time a couple ways. You're reading choices that don't end up as the correct one. You might be drawn to one of them and waste time trying to prove it in the passage. A lot of things can go wrong with that approach. Yeah, 4 of the 5 answer choices are wrong, and as we've seen before, they're going to mislead you with words that are found in the passage that might sound approximately right. Things like calcium carbonate in A, climatic conditions in D, atmospheric conditions in E. There's a lot of red herrings here. It's better as John Ron's pointing out, if you know where to look, to go to the passage first. And the thing is, you'll always know where to go to look if you look at the question critically. Look at all the nouns mentioned in the question. We've got the ratio of the isotopes. We know from our sketch where those were talked about. We know the answer is going to be in the second paragraph, and we have ocean sediments. We can also search for that. So actually, you will find your answer choice more quickly here in the text than you will over here. Yeah, 4 lies over here, whereas the passage is entirely true. If you guys are cool with that, or at least willing to practice that, give me a smiley face. And Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, one technique that I've seen work pretty well. Once you've gone back to the passage with these keywords and you've found either this proof or that proof, when you come back, you'll be able to do a direct match, but sometimes it can be hard to keep this idea in your head or this idea in your head, in which case boil it down to what I call the 5 words of truth. And you can maintain that in your head and then do a match. So for instance, what's true about the ratios according to this? I might change the word slightly, but I'd say the ratio gives me the ice. Ratio gives me the ice. And I'd be able to match that to C pretty quickly, and then I could check it and say, oh yeah, they can be used to deduce. Or if I use this one here, this whole sentence here, the higher the ratio, ... was laid down, I can turn that into 5 words of truth. Higher ratio, more land ice. And then I can match that up to this. That doesn't match quite verbatim, but it's close enough that I can find it. Notice also this verbatim thing matches to this one. They made this particular question kind of nice because there are 2 places you can go for the proof. That's not always the case, as we'll see.
And I like that, the 5 words of truth. If you had to boil it down to carve it into a stone tablet, what would it be? That's a good way to think about it. This will be our last one. Just missing a couple of answers, so take 15-20 seconds. All right, now this one we've got some disagreement on. I'll show you where we settled in just a moment. I don't want to bias us just yet. First, let's see whether we were all looking in the same place on the passage. So pick up that pointer again and tell us, point it where you went in the passage to find the answer. Okay, so you guys seem to be gravitating all to that same area. Let me make sure I haven't missed something else that you guys were pointing at. What told you to go there? Brooks, why did you go to that area?
I went to that area because it actually talks about the water evaporating, and it talked about the increasing oxygen 18.
Yeah, so these are kind of our power words. The evaporated ocean water in the question can be searched, or you can scan for that and find it right here. Phrased a little bit differently, but pretty close. Let me show you our answers. Even though we were all going to the same place, we had some disagreement between A, B, and C. Anyone want to argue for one of those three? I'll release the mic. Anyone can pick it up. All right, Angela, since no one's volunteering, I'm volunteering you. You were in the majority here. Oh, yeah, Andrea, you want to ask a question? It might actually, that'd be good to get to first.
Yeah, I was between answers B and C because in terms of a causality, it's like B would obviously then lead to C. And so I didn't know which, so I guess I thought C was more right because it would be highlighted easier to see versus B. So that's the reason why I chose it, but I thought they were both in that same mentality.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying that B, which is that there's less oxygen 18 in evaporated ocean water than ocean water, and you say that would lead to then less oxygen 18 in the ocean water than in the continental ice sheets. You'll never need to look at the two statements together. I don't think that's what you're doing. You're kind of thinking, well, which of these better relates to this part of the passage? But you're onto something here. What happens first, and what is caused to happen as a result? What is our sort of order of things happening? Andrew, could you sort of summarize what it says over here?
It basically says that the heavier isotopes go to the bottom. I kind of misread C. I'd rather go to B now. But basically, that the heavier water sinks to the bottom, and then I was thinking that it becomes put into the continental ice, into that ice shelf.
All right, yeah, let's, and Chris is going to draw us a picture here while I put it in words. The 18 stays in the ocean, right, because it's heavy and it sinks. I like the way you put that. And the 16 goes out. It evaporates because it's lighter. So the evaporated water, along with the 16 in it, ends up it goes to the ice sheets, right? And they kind of close this loop by talking about how if the water with the 16 stays in the ice sheets, it doesn't go back to the ocean. So if where do you have more 18 and where do you have less, and which choice says that best? Andrew, I see you're typing. Go ahead and answer that since you were the one that brought up this thought process. You ultimately landed on B. Is B well supported by what we've written here as our summary? And furthermore, you should be able to disprove C. There won't be two correct answers, and you have to pick the better of the two. There will be 4 absolutely provably wrong answers.
Right. What I was trying to say earlier, I guess, was that thinking that 18 would be the heaviest and therefore would stay in the water, I confused continental ice shelves with the sediment that was laid down. So I looked at C as when I saw it as continental ice shelves, that would be the deepest layer, the most where the most 18 would be. But I would agree that 16 would be in the air, and then 18 would be in the sea, and then the heaviest amounts of 18 would be at the bottom. That's where I was going with that.
Okay, I think you're actually sort of laying on your own interpretation of what they're saying here and thinking about how high in the ice sheet it is, talking about top and bottom. Yeah, really all you need to think about is like 3 different places for the water to be. The ocean, in the air as evaporation, and in the ice sheets. Where in those ice sheets doesn't matter as much because they don't really get into that. The correct answer in this case is B. And we can see why in a couple of ways. If the 18 stays in the ocean, and what ends up in the ice sheets, or in the evaporated water, is 16, that supports this idea that the evaporated water has less of the 18 than the ocean water does. Because we were already told the evaporated water didn't have that much of the 18. Yeah, the ocean keeps the heavier stuff. From the actual text, we could go back and see where they said that. There is a line here where they say, the remaining ocean water becomes progressively enriched in oxygen 18. In other words, there's more of the 18 in the ocean water. What's the exact flip of that statement? If there's more in the ocean water, 18 in ocean, doesn't that stand to reason that that means there's less 18 in the evaporate? And that's what they're going for in an inference question. Danielle, looks like you're commenting on that. Go ahead and tell me if you're disagreeing with what I just said.
I confess I wasn't paying much attention. I was between B and C also, but the reason I chose B was because I thought, like, the comparison you're making is simply between, like, where it's coming out of to where it's going. So you can't compare, like, the absolute amounts. I don't know. I don't think what I'm saying makes much sense, but that's why I went with B over C.
Okay, yeah, there's like a finite amount of 16 and 18. So basically, like, this question is just about where does it end up. We don't have to get too caught up in, like, you know, what percent goes where, but just relative terms is what they're after here, and we kind of see that with the split here between the same and less and different and more. This has to do with relative amounts, and as long as you can find support for the idea that there's more in the ocean when contrasted to the evaporated water, just the alternate rephrasing of that is that there's less of the 18 in the evaporated water than in the ocean. So that's kind of a significant quality of this inference type of question. Notice that we didn't quote from the passage verbatim in this choice. We actually went with a choice that sort of rephrased it from the opposite point of view. And actually you can disprove C, because C talks about the ice in the ice sheets and compares that to the evaporated ocean water. But remember when Andrew was talking us through that, he said, hey, it's the evaporated water basically is what ends up in the ice sheets. So that water is all the same stuff. The evaporated water and the ice sheets should have the same amount of 16 and 18 in them. So the word less in C is actually the thing that's wrong. It should say the same if that were to be correct. Yeah, and I like the way you're putting that, Danielle. The evaporated amount lessens within the ocean. All right. I think this is a good point for us to break and take 5 minutes just to clear our heads and come back and do some math. Hey guys, you may have noticed that Chris dropped out of the session during the break. It looks like he has just rejoined us. Kick back for another 30 seconds or so while he makes sure that he's all set up, and then we'll get started.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I had a little computer quick malfunction. It's one of the reasons why we have two instructors, actually, so that if necessary, we can take over seamlessly from each other. So let's dive right on in. We've got an hour and about 15 minutes through to the end of class, so let's power up. We are doing data sufficiency now, and I talked about manipulations in my email to you, or mentioned them. And we're going to talk about the combo. So first, let's see a review, some of our do's and don'ts. Again, you use the grid, the ADBCE grid, or DDACE. Remember to start with the easy statement, the one that you can quickly use to eliminate a couple of answer choices because it's obviously insufficient. And always try to rephrase the question and the statements. You can't always, but you should go ahead and try. On the don't side, remember not to suffer from statement carryover, where we let the statements bleed into each other. When you're considering whether or not a single statement is sufficient, remember not to consider the other one until such time as you're actively considering C, the together option. Secondly, don't confuse no with insufficient. A definite no on a yes-no question is just as good as a definite yes. They're both sufficient. It's only if you're left with that maybe, some yeses, some nos, or you're not sure, that a yes-no question is left unanswered. And finally, never switch up or confuse a yes-no question with a value question. A value question is one such as what is x? What is x plus y? Something like that, asking you for a number. Yes-no asks you for a yes or no, and you can often answer a yes-no question without knowing the value of the underlying variables. You just need to know something about them. Now, I imagine along the way here for the last few weeks you've felt a little bit like you've been going back to middle school or high school. The actual content you're reviewing here of algebra and grammar might take you back to what it's like to have a locker or have gym class and things like that. Here's another little flashback to high school, however long ago it was for you. This rule from algebra class. To solve for two variables, you need two equations. Or three variables, three equations. Three equations, three unknowns. However, on the GMAT, you should assume nothing. This is not a true rule. This is a rule of thumb. This is a common pattern that to solve for two variables, you need two equations, etc. It does not hold true all the time, and of course, as a result, the GMAT exploits the exceptions. So, take a look at this example and poll in your answer. Go ahead and give this one a try. Okay, take a few more seconds on this one. Take a shot if you're not sure. Go ahead. Come on now. Okay, what I'd like you to do is type into the direct message window for everyone to see how many variables we have in this problem. type in how many variables we have in this problem. Yep, we've got 3, x, y, and z. And how many equations do we have? Type it in for everyone to see. How many equations? We just have 2. Yet, most of you picked C, which is interesting. So, Ryan, jump on the mic and explain how you picked C, even though you have 3 variables and only 2 equations.
Okay. When you go through the data sufficiency, you look at your A, D, B, C, E. So when you look at statement 1 on its own, you don't have enough information to solve it. So that gets rid of A and D, and then you look at statement 2, and then you again don't have enough information to solve for X. So you get rid of B. But then when you look at them together, you just notice the statement 2 says Y plus Z equals 5. Well, there's a Y and a Z in the denominator number 1. It just is multiplied by 2. So because of that, you actually know the value of the entire denominator of 1 is just multiplied by 2. So because of that, then you could solve and then see both they are both sufficient, or they're sufficient together, sorry.
That's right, C is the correct answer here. And notice what we have is that in that first statement, we've got 3 variables, but we can pull out the 2 in the denominator and make something that we saw in the second statement, this y plus z. Notice, by the way, I would actually recommend starting, although I sometimes forget to do this myself, I would recommend starting with statement 2 here, because we can quickly dismiss it as insufficient. It doesn't even contain x. Therefore, we can knock out BD pretty fast. But you know, you can look at this one and say, there's no way I'm getting rid of y and z. I'm not going to be able to get rid of them and find x by itself. So that one's pretty easy too. But what's interesting is that once you put these together, you can plug in 5 for this y plus z combo, as we'll call it. And from that, you can say 3x over 10 equals 3, and then solve for x, which winds up being 10. You don't have to actually solve it at that point. This takes advantage of this thing we call the combo, and in this problem, y plus z winds up being the combo. Notice that if these numbers in front of the y and z were slightly different, we would not be able to pull this trick. If it said 2y plus 3z, we'd be screwed. We would not be able to pull out the 2. Or if it said 3y plus 2z, something like that. What we need is we need 2 and 2, or 3 and 3, or the same numbers in front here to match the ratio of 1 to 1 in this thing here. So you have to actually try it. In some cases it might not be enough, in other cases it will be. Any questions on that? So we've now found a counterexample where we were able to solve for x with just 2 equations and 3 unknowns. And it's really because what y plus z becomes is kind of its own unknown that shows up in both problems. And therefore we can get rid of it as a sort of unit. But from this, we can't actually solve for y or z independently, but we don't care about that. Now let's try another example. I'll clear the, actually it's already been cleared. Go ahead and give this one a shot. Take about 15 more seconds towards 2 minutes. All right, that's 2 minutes, which I was keeping on my stopwatch. We've got a split here between C and E, which is what I like to see. hopefully you were able to figure out relatively quickly that it couldn't be A, D, or B because we can't get rid of the y's on their own. But it really boils down to, can you do it when you put these things together? We've got a split there between C and E, as I said. Danielle, jump on the mic and talk about what you did and how you thought about it.
I combined and I solved for y, and you get y equals 4 or 3, so then x would equal 3 or 4. So it's not conclusive, therefore I got E.
Fantastic. In retrospect, you can see what the numbers would be. That you could have 3 and 4, that pair, for x and y, and 3 times 4 gives you 12, or you could swap those around. 4 and 3 likewise add up to 7, and 4 times 3 multiply to 12. There's nothing to distinguish which one is x and which one is y, and getting it down to 2 numbers is not good enough from the GMAT's point of view. I'll show you the math over here. It's quadratic math from last week. So when you solve one of the, and I'm actually going to solve for x. So if we take the second equation and solve for y in order to isolate, in order to be able to substitute and get rid of it, what we get is y equals 12 over x. And then when we sub into the first equation, I'll show you that here, we get x plus 12 over x equals 7. This 12 over x is where the y used to be. And that 12 over x came from the second statement. So then when we multiply through by x, that's a hidden quadratic up top, multiply through by x, we get x squared plus 12 equals 7x. We put everything on one side, we get x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. And then actually we're back to the question of what numbers multiply up to 12 and add or subtract to 7, and we get 3 and 4. In this case, negative, because we're looking for a negative sum here, and they both must be negative in order to multiply up to positive, but that gives us the positive roots, 3 and 4. And then x could be either one of them, as we saw back on this page. So as a result, we have here 2 equations, 2 unknowns, and it doesn't look like either equation is that weird, and yet we don't have enough information to solve for x, or y for that matter. So the correct answer here is E. We do not have enough, even though we might think that we do. Emily's got a great point. When we have one variable times another variable, when we put the product of 2 variables down, it's kind of like an x squared. And that should make us think we're going to have more than one solution. In fact, that product of the variables winds up leading directly to having an x squared when we put the 2 things together. It's really only when we have 2 equations where the variables are just summed or subtracted that we can say 2 equations, 2 unknowns. Something like x plus y equals 7, x minus y equals 3, then we're good. 2 equations, 2 unknowns. Brooks, testing these numbers for x. I'm not quite sure of your question. Jump on the mic and explain a little bit more.
I remember reading that for when you're doing combinations, you come up with 2 values for x, that it's often good to test your value by plugging it back into the original equation. And I'm wondering and then verifying that you actually get a valid answer. But I'm just not sure if this is a particular case where we need to do that, or can we just stop there and say we've got 2 values so we don't have to do anything?
That's a great question. Now I understand. You really only have to test whether or not the values you come to fit the original equation or equations that you've derived it from when you've been squaring or unsquaring the entire equation. you've got roots, or something in a way similar, absolute values. Those are circumstances under which you should test the values that you get to see whether or not they fit the original form of the equation. But here we didn't do anything funky. We just divided by x here, and then on this next page, we just had a standard quadratic. So nothing too weird. But when we get 3 or 4, you'd see pretty quickly that y would be 4 or 3. The alternate pair should make sense. It never hurts to actually put it back in, but it might be a little bit of a waste of time here. What we call a situation like this when we get 2 equations, 2 unknowns, but it's not enough. You could call it a mismatch. You think that you've got enough, but you don't. So let's talk more about this combo. The GMAT is in love with combinations or combos. So for instance, it might ask you, what is the value of x plus y? It could ask you a yes-no question. It could say, is x plus y even? Now, give me a smiley face or a thumbs down. Is statement 1 sufficient? Is the statement you now see sufficient to answer the question? I see some smiley faces. Awesome. And a couple of different ways you could do that. You could divide everything through by 3 and get x plus y equals 5. Or you could factor out the 3 first and get 3 times the quantity x plus y equals 15, then divide by 3. But either way, you can get x plus y equals 5. The misperception that people have is that you need both x and y to solve for their sum. Yes, it's true that if you know what x and y are, then you can get any combo related to them. You can get x plus y. Heck, you can get x squared plus y to the 17th power, or whatever you want, if you know the underlying variables. But you do not need the underlying variables. The GMAT knows that people have this misperception and therefore loves statements like this. So you don't want to say to yourself, you know what, I need to know x and I need to know y, and this doesn't give me enough. Rather, you take the combo here, and then you see whether or not you can turn the statement into a statement about that combo. And notice we won't get x or y individually. We can just do this manipulation and get x plus y equals 5. And what's x, what's y? We don't know. Who cares? We just need the combo, x plus y. So yeah, I like this thought that Emily's put there. Don't be too picky. Don't say, you know, I have to have all this stuff, x by itself, y by itself. No, you can do it with the combo. You can also have disguised combos. So what I'd like you to do here is type into the direct message window, but don't hit return yet. Don't hit return. Type into the direct message window what the real question is here. Don't hit return. Just type in what you think the real question is about here. Type it into the direct message window. Hold. Don't hit return. Probably guessing it's not what is Z. Go ahead and type it in. Don't hit return yet. Have it go to everybody in just a second. Okay, hit return. Let's see them all. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're really caring about. We really care about the value of this hidden combo. You think it's about Z, but what you should do is take the given information here, this Z minus 2W equals Y, manipulate it around to isolate Z, and then that's really what the question is. So what I do on my paper is I write this down, and then I write Z equals question mark, y plus 2w equals question mark. And I have that over in my corner. I've circled it. It's super important. So now let's do a question around that, knowing that this is our question. So go ahead and solve this. Put in your answer when you're ready in the polling, not in the direct message window. Yeah, take a shot. Chris, come on and explain your thinking for your answer.
Sure. The first thing I did was eliminate A and D because we're looking for y plus 2w, and the first choice doesn't give you any help with that. So moving on to the second one, do the cross multiply and move the equations on the variables on the one side, and you get 2w plus y equals 0, which is gives you an answer to what you're looking for. So I chose B.
That's fantastic, and that's right. So you notice when you manipulate around y plus 2w, you could actually get all the way down here by simply adding w to both sides. You could do it the way we've shown here, which is solve for y and then plug y into the combo you're looking for. Or you could simply say, if I know that y plus w equals 6, I can simply add w to both sides, and I get 6 plus w equals y plus 2w. So I've got my target expression over here, and on the right side I have an expression that is not just a number. It's a number with some variables. And by definition, I don't know what a variable is. I don't know what an unknown is. So I can't answer the question once I've gotten one side of the equation equal to my combo. Now here, I cross multiply and I find 2w equals minus y. You can plug in, or you could add y to both sides, and you get that y plus 2w equals 0, which is not expected when you look at this. Doesn't really look like something that will force that to be a single number, but in fact, it will be. So Emily puts it really well that this given here is a fact. When they say if, they mean take that stuff that comes right after it as a fact and put that together with the question by solving for the variable that's in the question. And notice that makes the question seemingly more complicated. We originally put rephrasing to you as something that looks to simplify the question. You'd say, wait, z equals question mark. What is z? Is about as simple as you can get. Why would I want to go for this? Well, because they aren't going to give you z in the statements. They're going to give you something involving y and w. So once you get these statements rephrased themselves to the combo in question, which we've highlighted in blue, then just look at the other side. If it's a number, then you're good. If it's a what is question. If it's an expression like this, then you're not good. So we've talked about rephrasing. That's really at the heart of this. We talked about rephrasing a while back in the first session is what is the GMAT really asking you? That's what the question's about. And the statements, you're rephrasing to figure out what the GMAT is really telling you. And we talked about 4 different kinds of rephrasing, and the second kind here, manipulation, is really the key to these combo problems. So let's try another single question. Give this one a shot. I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll actually put it on the board this time. And go ahead. All right, I'm going to stop you early at a minute. I want you to type into the direct message window again without hitting return. What is this question really asking for? Go ahead and type it into the direct message window. What is this question really asking for? Don't hit return. Okay. Go ahead. Hit return. Tell me what it is. No worries. What is x over y? So, Danielle, go ahead, jump on the mic. Tell us how you got there.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I isolated w, and you get x over 3y, which is 1/3 times x over y. So I just assumed I just figured you have to figure out what x over y is, since we know that what 1/3 is.
That's precisely it. Notice there are two kinds of manipulation going on here. One is just sort of an algebraic manipulation to move around to w by itself, and then you realize, you know what, I don't really care about the 1/3 part. I'll just drop that. So yeah, okay. Now everyone continue from there, knowing that the question is really, what is x over y? Go. Take a shot even if you're not comfortable. Okay. I see a mixture of answers. Let's go ahead and get some people on the mic. Roshan, get on the mic and talk about how you did it from this point forward. Oops, my fault. Let's see. Razi, go ahead.
Well, when Danielle said, her isolating the x over y, that made it really easy. So when you look at statement 1, 4y equals 3x, you can automatically kind of see that x over y is 4/3. And with statement 2, you can't really get that kind of isolation going. So that led to A being sufficient.
Yep, that's right. I just clicked you off the mic there real fast. With this first one, what you can do is divide both sides by y and by 3, and you get to this statement. And I want to point out that you should think that ratios are powerful. That is, whenever you have a statement that gives you a constant ratio of two variables, such as this statement does, you should be biased towards thinking that is sufficient, even if you can't totally prove it. And that's just kind of a trick, but it's a meaningful trick, and that's because the ratio of two variables shows up in all kinds of different problems, as we're going to see next week and the week after when we deal with rates and ratios and other kinds of problems. In this one, for instance, here, we don't see on the outset that a constant ratio of x to y or x over y would be the thing that they're really asking for, but after a little rephrasing, we get there. And so I want you to be biased towards thinking that ratios are going to be sufficient, even surprisingly so. Now the second statement, you can rearrange it by adding x and subtracting 2y to this, and then I can actually divide both sides by y, which I'm going to do kind of jury-rigged here and throw in a line, and I get x over y equals 10 minus 2y all over y. Now I'm doing that just to show you that yes, you can turn this equation into a valid expression, x over y on one side. But you're going to get something complicated on the other side, something that has a bunch of variables that you can't get out. You must leave the y's in there. You can't cancel them out completely. So this is not a constant, and therefore it does not give you a constant ratio. So just revealing sort of the pieces here, the kernel, as we mentioned, or the final thing you're really looking for, the final combo is x over y, as Danielle found. And then, once we get it to this stage, then we can manipulate. We get x over y equals 4/3. Hey, that matches exactly. The second one doesn't give it to you. So notice we've got a match in the first statement to exactly the combo. If you're asked this question, you should be able to get it to A. But they just disguise it. So again, it's a matter of revealing or penetrating the real disguise. Now, what are these ways that we can manipulate the question or the statement? We have an acronym for those, and we call it MADS. The MADS manipulations are 4 types of manipulations, and they're sort of counterparts or flip manipulations, the reverse. So the M stands for multiply or divide, because they're really, as one of our instructors puts it, they're 2 horns of the same bull, multiplying and dividing. Act pretty much the same, because multiplying by a number is the same as dividing by that number's reciprocal. So you can go back and forth between these 2 variations, multiplying the left by 3 and you get the right. Divide the right by 3 and you get the left. The A stands for that most basic of arithmetic operations, addition, and its other horn, subtraction. By adding 2w to the left side, the left equation to both sides of the left equation, you get the equation on the right. And by subtracting 2w from both sides of the right equation, you get the left one. Now the D stands for distribution or distributing. And its inverse or sort of opposite number is factoring. So if you've got something that's distributed and the distributed form is over here, I'm sorry, this is the distributed form, but the way to get there is to distribute a minus b squared. And you can write that as a minus b times a minus b and FOIL it out, as we talked about last week. Distribution also holds when you have just one number times the sum or the difference of 2 other numbers. I also want to point out that distributing and factoring you can do to just one expression. You don't have to do it to both sides of an equation. We don't have an equal sign here. We just have a minus b, that quantity squared. And you can just turn it on its own to this, or you could factor that up into this. Finally, the last manipulation is kind of a special wrench in the toolbox. It's squaring and its partner unsquaring. And you have to be a little bit careful here. To your earlier question, Brooks, this is when you have to check whether or not the number fits. So when you square or unsquare, in this case, the only possible number that would fit would be 45. 45 plus 4 square rooted equals 7 is the same thing as 45 plus 4 equals 49. But in some other cases, you have to be a little bit careful. For instance, when we see that x squared equals 9, unsquaring that, we have to take into account the negative possibility. So what we're going to do at this point, and through the rest of the class basically here before the midterm survey, which will just take a few minutes at the end, we're going to give you sets of 3 problems. And we're going to give you just a certain amount of time per problem. So for instance, for this first set, I'm only going to give you 1.5 minutes per problem, so a total of 4 minutes and 30 seconds for this first set. want you to put into the chat window what your answers are when you get them, and we're having you send them just privately to us. So give me a smiley face if you're ready for your first set. Oh yeah, come on, I want to see everybody smile. Oh yeah. Okay. I got a couple of people who aren't smiling. All right, you're going to smile after this set. Here you go. 3 problems. You got 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Go ahead and get started. I'll pop the timer up. Okay, I know that's faster than normal. I'm going to push you for time on a couple of these sets because you need to make sure that you can take shots even when you're uncomfortable. All right, good job. Seen a lot of good answers here. Let's roll through them. First one, type in now to everybody. I'll switch it back in a second. Type in now to everyone how to rephrase this. What's the real question? Type it into all. Show everybody. What is the real question with this first problem? Yeah. I'm seeing a couple variations. What's yn squared? And technically, that's right. And we might even say, you know what, we just really need to know the value of yn in order to get the value of yn squared. Either way, we might stop at this point, being a little hesitant to sort of take away the square. Either way is fine. And then when we look at the answer choices, notice that statement 1 matches it exactly. If we didn't break it down to what is yn, then we could easily put the 10 back into this and find that x equals 100. And then notice this also gives us a value for yn. So the correct answer here is D. Notice also that this is an unusual, it's not totally unusual, but it's a particular kind of data sufficiency in which one of the statements fully implies the other one. That is, statement 2 implies statement 1. If you know statement 2, you get statement 1 for free. There's no way that y can be 40 and n is a quarter and not have this be true. Notice it doesn't go the other way around, but if you know that statement 2, you know as well the contents of statement 1. So there's no way that it could be statement 1 by itself, nor could it be the two statements together, because statement 1 doesn't give you anything more than statement 2 already does. So this 2 implies one thing. It shows up from time to time, so it's worth noting. The grid isn't built around that, but if you notice this particular fact in a data sufficiency, that one of the statements implies the other, then it can only be this statement by itself, or each statement individually, or neither statement not even together. It would only be, say, for instance, in this case, B, D, or E. Let's go to the next question. Does the product JKMN equal 1? I wouldn't really rephrase that into anything. I would just write it as JKMN equal to 1, question mark. Remember, whenever you have a yes-no question, do not simply write JKMN equals 1 and then move on. Always put, please, for my sake, put this question mark, because then you remember that it's a question. It's not a truth. It's not a fact. And in order to do that, I often write is in front of it, or does in front of it. Don't also rephrase this one. Do not rephrase to JKMN equals question mark. What is JKMN? Remember, don't change a yes-no question, such as this one, into a what is question. Yes, Ravi?
Just a question about what you just said with regard to don't rephrase this question, but can you also sometimes look at the answers or the possibilities that are given, and then kind of, in this question, you could kind of say, does JK equal MN? Because based on the potential answers we have, we could see this, we could kind of visualize and say that, yeah, we could isolate JK MN potentially.
That's interesting. So you want to change this question into does JK equal MN? And I think what you're doing there is slightly fallacious. You're moving the MN over to the other side, but you are not dividing by MN. In order to get rid of MN, you've got to divide both sides by MN. So you could ask, does JK equal 1 over MN? But you don't have to know that JK equals MN. Yes, Razi?
Product JK times J times K times M times N, whether it's JM or KM or MN or what have you, because it equals 1, 2 of those products should equal the product of another 2. Or am I just smoking crack?
Let's see. 2 of these products, J times K, should equal M times N. So let's imagine JK equals 4, like J times K equals 4, and M times N equals 4. That would not give us JKMN equal 1. But in that case, we had JK equal MN. I think Emily's got a good point of view on this. Emily, jump on.
I think what may happen to a lot of people, I was scanning up to your answers on this one. You guys seem to be split between B and D. Some folks are seeing 2 as different, statement 2 as unique in some way, and some of you are seeing the 2 statements as equivalent. Ganesh is pointing out that they are not equivalent statements, even though they look an awful lot alike. You can manipulate this one to give you JK and MN and actual values for them, and they jive with statement 1. But there are exceptions. Statement 1 actually allows for a lot more possibilities, as Ganesh is saying, 50 over 50, 25 over 25. With this one, you don't actually know anything about JK and MN individually.
Yep, fantastic. Remember that both statements are your friends. They're both true. In other words, if statement 2 gives it to you, and in fact it does, when you manipulate multiplying, say, the first equation there by K, and you get JK equals 1 and MN equals 1, and you get a match, that looks then, when you look at 1, like, oh yeah, that would fit here. but there are more possibilities. So don't think that because both statements are true that they necessarily tell you the same thing. If you manipulate that first statement, you get JK equals MN, and then if you sub into the question, you get JK times JK. Does that equal 1? In other words, does JK, the quantity squared, equal 1? And you don't know whether that's true or not. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. So be careful on this one. Don't assume the answer that JKMN equals 1 and then plug it into the statements. Remember to move from the statements to the question. And indeed, yes, statement 2 does imply statement 1. If you know 2 and you are able to then, in fact, answer the question, that gives you 1 for free. But 1 alone does not give you enough. So let me remove this last bit here. You cannot get a single value for JKMN. No worries, a lot of people fall into this trap. And this last question in this set, I should say, value of x squared minus y squared, that was one of our special products from last week. So you should automatically be thinking, factor that puppy up. That's the F, not in MADS, but the F side of D. Distribute and or factor. So we're factoring x plus y, x minus y. And statement 2 looks just like it if we manipulate by multiplying both sides by x plus y. That is sufficient, but statement 1, you will not get a single value for x minus y times x plus y. If you sub this in, that's another way to think of it, you won't get a single value out. Whereas you do get a single value out when you sub in here. So let's do another set. We'll do 2 more sets before the night is through. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this next one. Here you go. Again, put it into the direct message window, which will go just to us. Okay, give them to me. Put them on in. Looks like I'm getting them. Okay, great. On this first one, I'm going to do this a little bit top down, make sure we hit this last set with enough time. All right, everybody. Can't really rephrase this one, so we're just left with the combo. We're looking for B plus C equals something. Easy statement here. Please remember to look for the easy statement. And the easy statement is A plus D equals 4. That is not going to give it to you. Don't write down both statements and then decide. Rather, glance at them, make a decision which statement is easier, write that one down first, and then choose your grid. So you can get rid of B and D pretty fast this way. And you're left with A, C, and E. Hey, it's on tough problems, you need to quickly reduce uncertainty, or as quickly as you can. Thanks, Angela. Or thanks, Emily. On 1, you should be looking at this, and if you're stuck for time, you should be thinking, well, you know, there's A, B, C, and D in there. I'm probably not going to be able to get rid of A and D. So you should be thinking, you know what, I'm probably going to get rid of A at this point. And so you're left with C and E. But let's go ahead and manipulate this up. So we can pull out an A from the 2 I'm going to highlight here. AB and AC. AB plus AC gives me A times the quantity of B plus C. Likewise, CD plus BD, I can pull a common D out of those. Now, a lot of people stop here. But what you should do is keep going and say A times something plus D times something equals A plus D times that something. How about that? If you doubt that, FOIL this baby up at this point, and you'll get back exactly statement 1. You get AB plus AC plus DB plus DC equals 6. Now, they're not in the same order and they're flipped around. Who cares? So this is really one to grow on in terms of your factoring and distributing. So you get B plus C equals 6 over A plus D. That's not enough on its own. But then once you put them together, B plus C equals 6 over 4. And notice we have 4 variables and 2 equations. And yet we're able to solve. We're able to solve for this combo B plus C using this combo A plus D, and then this really winds up just being the product of those 2 combos. So it's really as if there are sort of 2 underlying variables. One is A plus D, the other one is B plus C. And yes, indeed, C and E, you can actually prove pretty fast in this case that it's got to be one or the other. You do have to watch jumping to them too fast. But in this case, we know 2 is not enough, and 1 we should very strongly suspect is not enough at first glance, without even manipulating this one around. And then it's really a case of, is it C or E? And I wouldn't try to game theory the GMAT too much, like, is it trying to fake me out? This is one of those where the high school rule isn't enough. Yeah, that turns out to be the case in this case, that the high school rule does not hold. But should you always go that way? I don't know. So instead, just learn the manipulations, actually do it out. And review this one if you need to. Next problem, I had a guy in one of my classes, just a very, very fast story, who came to me before class. This was face-to-face, and it was a corporate class at one of our clients. And he said, you know what, Chris, I just wanted to let you know that I scored #1 in the country on a national math exam in college. I said, that's great, fantastic. You're probably going to ace the math part of this. And glad you're in the class. Tell you what, just show me, do kind of polling fast, what you get on a problem. And because we didn't have this kind of cool polling in a face-to-face class, I just had him flash me fingers, kind of gang style, on problems. And I remember when I showed him this problem, showed the class this problem, he flashed me the wrong answer in about 10 seconds. And I shook him off. And then he said, oh, he shook his own head and said, I know, it should be this other answer. And I said to him afterwards, look, you know, you can't go in and tell the GMAT that you scored #1 in the country on this math exam, and so therefore only give you the toughest problems and show just how good you are at math, you've got to not be too cool for school. You've got to actually do the work. Don't just glance at it and decide. And this was exactly that problem that he fell into a trap on. What you got to do is take the fact, as Emily put it before, the if part, solve for k. The real question is, what is m minus n? Statement 1 only talks about n, so it can't be enough. Statement 2 looks like it's not enough until you actually do the manipulation. Subtract n from both sides. Subtract 10 from both sides. Oh my goodness, we get m minus n equals -10. That is enough. And he looked at this one and thought, oh, I need them both together, it's C, because he just did it in his head. And then I shook him off and he said, oh, I see, it's got to be, it's just B. And there's a C trap here, because you look at the statements and you say, man, if I just put these two statements together, I know I can do it. And you sort of underestimate the idea that, you know what, you might be able to do it with just one of the statements alone. That's why we don't want you to test whether or not you can do it with both statements together until you've thoroughly done this work with just one of the statements alone. Do not let the statements bleed over. Even if you deal with statement 1 first, remember to forget about it. We didn't put in 10 over here for n. So just deal with it on its own. The correct answer here is B. And finally, what is the value of xy? Again, no real rephrasing. So we do one of these statements on its own, and we can't really get a value for xy. If we try, we're going to get some complicated expression on the right. We would get, actually, we'd get 10 minus y, that quantity times y. And that's not going to be sufficient. Likewise, not sufficient over here. And you could also see it by thinking, okay, a bunch of different numbers could add up to 10, but their product will not be a single number. Likewise, a bunch of different numbers could subtract to 6, but their product will not be a single number. Now here's where the sort of exception proves the rule. When you get two statements together and you're looking for a combo, don't necessarily go for the combo right away. If you see how to, go ahead, but sort of all bets are off. Do whatever seems natural. And in this case, what seems natural is just combining the two equations. In fact, we can add them. And if you learn to add or subtract equations, it's really handy because you can quickly isolate one variable. You can also do substitution, but in this case, adding the two equations is really fast. It kills the y's, gives us x equals 8. That lets us find y equals 2. And therefore xy equals 16. Notice this is a case in which we do know the underlying variables, and so therefore we can find any combo. We could also have stopped at the point up here, once we decided these two were insufficient by themselves, by noticing these two are what are called linear equations. They're just sums, differences of variables equaling a number. You could have a number in front of x like 2x plus y, or you could have 3x minus 5y equals 6. If you have two different equations that follow that linear rule, that linear pattern, then you can always get x and y by combining those two equations in some fashion. You can always solve. So it'd be great if you can see that you don't actually have to do this math out. So this is the exception again that proves the rule. You do actually get the underlying variables here. Now, in just the last few minutes here, I'd love to squeeze in this last set. Let's give it a try, and I'll give you a full 6 minutes. Go ahead. All right, I'm sorry. This is a rough set for the last set of the night. I know, especially those of you on the East Coast. I'm sorry to have you greet your Thursday this way. It's tough, I know. And when you're seeing tough problems, I don't want you to, judge problems as you're going through the GMAT. But you see tough problems, that's not a bad sign, right? So you got to get used to being scrappy. Go ahead and take your shot. All right, because we are actually over time, again, I'm going to walk through these. Stop me if you've got questions. Let's first take a look at this first one. What in the Sam Hill are they asking us here? Is 9 to the x plus 9 to the minus x equal to b? Huh? Well, I'm not so sure of a way to rephrase that. And again, I don't want to use the statements too much backwards to try to rephrase. I should try to rephrase on its own, any question on its own, using, if anything, the given information, but there's not really a good way to put that in here. So I'd leave that alone, and I go to the easy statement. Statement 2, x is greater than 0, doesn't even mention b, so that's not enough. On tough questions such as this one, this is one of the last ones here, you've got to get used to taking advantage of everything you've got here. Now, what we have over here is a really complicated way to show that, in fact, statement 1 is sufficient. But I want to cover this up for a second and point out, if you're at this stage and you've knocked out B and D, and you're at A, C, and E, you should look and say, okay, before I dive into all the algebra, is there anything about this one that even together, maybe I'll just skip and think about them together. And statement 2 doesn't really add to statement 1 at all. Just knowing that x is greater than 0 doesn't really add anything to statement 1. In fact, because I've got an x and a minus x in there in sort of similar positions, so it really doesn't restrict the statement at all once I've added 2 to it. So C can't really be the answer. And then when I'm going between A and E on a statement like this, I'm looking and I'm thinking, what I want to do is I want to square this bad boy up, statement 1, and finally that'll give me B plus 2 on the right side, and it'll somehow get me close to this thing, and I bet it's going to be enough, whether it tells me yes or no. Now, what makes this a 700-plus level question is actually doing this math, but don't let this math be the thing that stumps you. You should be getting this down to A or E, being scrappy, and then kind of getting rid of E just on a guess and going for A, thinking that statement 1 should be enough on its own to answer yes or no. Now, when I actually FOIL out this thing, or I know my special products, I get 3 to the x squared plus 2 times the cross product, as it's called, the 3 to the minus x times 3 to the x, and then 3 to the x squared. Now, applying my exponent rules, I can bring those exponents in on the outsides, 3 to the 2x here, and I sum these exponents. Negative x plus x gives me 0 here, and 3 to the 0 equals 1. So I get 3 to the 2x plus 2 in the middle there. And then I can subtract off the 2. And then I can pull the 2 inside and say that's 3 squared to the x, which is 9 to the x. And that's 3 squared to the minus x, or 9 to the minus x. This is definitely one to go back to and look at again on the recording, because I want you to know how to do all this math. But you should not let the difficulty of this math slow you down from getting a good shot at the answer. So that's number 165. Definitely one to go and redo, both in order to practice this algebra, which is key. It's important to know how to do this. And in a way, even more importantly, to practice being scrappy, how to get rid of BD fast, how to then look at A at statement 1 and get rid of C by jumping and putting the statements together, avoiding the hard math, and then guessing between A and E. This one here, xn does not equal 0. All that means is we're not dividing by 0. What's the value of s? Double-decker fractions like this freak people out. They don't like them. But what you got to do is say, okay, in order to simplify this thing, I just got to combine up these two fractions, 1 over x and 2 over 3x. Combining those up, I get a common denominator of 3x. So I'll just write 3 in front here, 3 times 1, and 3 times x there on the bottom, and I get 5 over 3x. And dividing one fraction by another fraction is just multiplying by the reciprocal. So long story short, again, I get x over n. And so my real question is, what is the value of x over n? And so statement 2 by itself, insufficient. I don't even have a value for x. If I got stuck on this rephrasing, I should be thinking, okay, statement 2 doesn't even tell me x. It's unlikely I'll be able to cancel x in this. I should get rid of b and d again. Statement 1, hey, I've got this constant ratio. I bet that's good enough according to what Chris said before. But even if you didn't manage to rephrase this, you should be able to see, wait a second, putting these two together, I will get x equal to 1, and I have n equal to 1/2, which would be enough. So in the BDACE grid, I know I can get rid of B and D, and I should be able to work backwards and get rid of E. It's definitely not E, because I know I can solve for both things here. Thanks, Emily. And then I should be thinking, you know, it's a little too simple for it to be C. It's kind of a trap. This is kind of too complicated for me to be thinking, you know what, I can so easily solve for x and n. So this is good guessing strategy on this question, to be going for A. So even if you are stumbling on this stuff, this thinking you should practice. So this is another good one to go back to, note it down, to revisit this question kind of cold. Try it again in a few days out of your book. Try, of course, to learn this math, this manipulation here, but then also make sure that you're working the problem in the best way possible. Lastly, what is the value of xy? Hopefully you're thinking, okay, I could not get a value for xy out of this. If I just multiply both sides by x, I get xy on the left, and I get x squared plus 1 on the right. X squared, I'm sorry, plus x on the right, which is not enough. Likewise, statement 2 is not going to be enough. So pretty quickly I should be saying, you know, from this particular thing, from these two statements, I can get it down to C and E. This is a case where you do get it down to C or E, and then putting them together is the hard thing. Since they both equal y, since both statements equal y, I can just set them equal to each other. And by setting them equal to each other, I notice I get a quadratic, which once I factor it, I have two solutions, x equals 1 or x equals 0, which means that y is 1 or y is 2 when I sub it back in, and there's more than one unique solution for xy. And I would actually definitely check back. One thing that we've seen on some difficult data sufficiencies is that even if you have a couple of different values for the underlying variables, the combo might be single valued. So for instance, they said, what's the difference of x and y? You would be able to get that from this. Since when x is 0, y is, and I'll type it underneath, y would be 1, and when x is 1, y would be 2, then xy equals 0 or 2, that's insufficient. So you should always check when you've got a combo is the thing you're looking for, as Emily put in, that you should absolutely check here. So this is a difficult set, this last set here. Definitely review it. I'll make sure you've got all three problems down. It's 165 and 150, which are very close to the end. The highest number in the 12th edition is 173, so these are both 700 plus problems. And number 56 out of the 11th, even though it's a little bit lower number, this is definitely very tricky. We deliberately put these in this order, by the way, to force you to move on and to be scrappy. So what I'm going to ask you to do, yeah, Razi, go ahead and ask your question.
About the order of the questions that appear in the OG. Maybe I missed this from several weeks ago, but did you just indicate that the latter questions, the higher up questions in the OG are all 700 plus questions?
The questions are in order of difficulty according to the GMAT. So the highest level questions in the OG, I would say, are 700 level, even higher 700 level. Now, we have no reason to doubt that to doubt what the GMAT is telling us. I will tell you that number 173 in the official guide seems a little easier than these two problems or three problems right here. So it's not always apparent, even to our eyes, why certain problems are considered harder or less hard by the GMAT. We know that they gather the data on what students are doing, so students are making some mistakes on number 173 there. Now, what exact number they correspond to, there's no need to actually figure that out. Just know that they're harder. We call it 700 plus, something like that. Hope that's helpful. Cool. So what I'm going to do at this point is call up the midterm survey, which is just a real fast how are we doing kind of thing, just to let us know what's going well, what you'd like changed, and anything else that's on your mind. We're going to stop the recording at this point, and we'll stick around for that afterwards, after it's